Have you ever wondered how to make your health happen in a world that is seemingly doing everything to push against that? And have you felt confused on what to do, how to do it, and even to the point when you feel like there's so much information that you don't even know what to listen to anymore? Well, I've struggled with that myself. I know a lot of listeners have. So today I'm inviting into the show is Dr. Pepper from, yes, the Dr. Pepper, Dr. Erik Peper from San Francisco State University. He is the head of the holistic health studies at San Francisco State University. He also has his own biofeedback practice where he teaches people how to take care of themselves, how to heal themselves through physical practices, mental practices, emotional practices, meditation practices. He was also a direct teacher of mine about 10 years ago when I studied at San Francisco State in their holistic health program. So I've invited him onto the show today to share a ton of wisdom about what you can actually do and what you can actually control in terms of creating your own health, your own wellness, your own peace, and ultimately your own happiness. So get ready to dive in. We have a great conversation around the things that we can do to change our lives that are very simple, very easy, and even fun. So hope you enjoy this latest episodes of the Wellness Lab, the podcast that teaches you how to create your own wellness equation. So dive in and let's have some fun. All right. Welcome into the Wellness Lab, the podcast that teaches you how to create your own wellness equation. Today we have Dr. Erik Peper from San Francisco State University. Dr. Peper, welcome to the show.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for the invitation to share some of our concepts we've observed over many years with thousands of students. And some of these skills, I think we can apply to everyone and every semester. I'm so impressed when students apply these skills as part of their homework practices. They report, significant changes. We had people who had severe back pain going literally from to zero. Last semester, we had someone who had epileptic seizures and they had no more seizures. We had a person with high blood pressure, and after 5 weeks, their blood pressure became normal. We had a woman who had an A1C, I guess, at 14, which is really high inflammation,
It's
basically high glucose.
like double.
Yes, she went down to 8 in 5 weeks. She really did the
And
changes.
when I took your course a decade ago, I actually taught myself how to meditate through the course at San Francisco State, and I could only meditate for 5 minutes at a time. And I would have to set a timer, and I would swear to God, after 2 minutes, it would had been an hour. And a decade later, now I've been teaching meditation for a decade and own a yoga studio and can meditate for hours if I want to. But a lot of that was the core work I learned in San Francisco State's holistic health program, and specifically around one of your books, How to Make Health Happen. So I'd love for us to dive into that question: is how do we make health happen as busy people who live in a city that may not have control over everything that impacts our health?
Yes. So to keep in mind of health, remember a lot of components we have no control over. It could be the environment around us, our genetics. So the general rule I think about is genetics loads the gun, and environment and behavior pulls the trigger. And so,
Mm.
in terms of a world where often we have access to healthcare may be challenging, access to healthy foods may be challenging, or whatever, the question is really, what can I do to optimize my health now and for the long term? And they're really two separate pieces. We all do things which are not which are unhealthy for a moment. That's not a problem usually. It's if we do it consistently. And so let me start with a simple example. The question I would ask you and ask almost all students is, did you have breakfast this morning?
For me, it's a non-negotiable.
Yes. And I totally agree. And I know some people don't eat breakfast because they're on a special fast or they go on special diets. I'm not talking about that group generally.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the normal person who's rushed in the morning and then, because they may have seen streaming videos at night. They have too much work to do. They have to take care of kids or whatever. They're rushing out. They don't eat breakfast, or their breakfast is simply coffee or with a Danish or a croissant or some very simple
Hmm.
cereals. And then they rush to work. And what they often experience, they're unaware of it often, that they're more irritable during the day and then they keep snacking. And what we then find is the most simple part with students. We've done this now hundreds of times. If you do a little experiment on yourself, and all you do is you make breakfast, and breakfast can be very simple and depends on the culture you're from. But the simple rules are include more protein, usually, include some fats, some fiber in fruits or veggies.
Hmm.
Make it no simple sugars, no simple cereals, all coated with sugar. You eat that. And I know initially it's difficult to eat often because
Hmm.
breakfast for many people is the most stressful time, especially when when we have kids, because we want to sleep longer. We have to wake up because to go to school, everybody's on a rush. So there's tension in the household, which
Hmm.
probably reduces our desire to eat. But give yourself time. And if you do this for about 5 days, it's remarkable how, one, you start feeling hungry when you wake up. That's one.
Hmm.
Two, that you find that overall your energy is more steady, which is the most interesting quality. And three, you find you snack much less. And
Hmm.
overall, people who eat breakfast tend to way less. So people who, and that's
Yep.
not true for everybody. None of these rules apply for everybody. They're general concepts, but it's most interesting. And even in our personal judgments, it's important. Think of it
Hmm.
of the study done in Israel with parole officers or the judges who are judging parole. So prisoners come in front of the judge, and the judge has to look at their case and say, okay, you can go on parole or you cannot, basically.
Yeah.
Every judge says, I am totally fair.
Hmm.
Now you actually,
Unless unless they skip breakfast.
you got it. No, it's not
Mm.
even if you skip breakfast. It is
Mm.
if you come after breakfast or after lunch, the probability of parole is very high. If you come before lunch or before near the end of the day, the probability of parole is almost zero. And there's an
Huh.
interaction there because by the end of the day or the end of the morning, you're tired, your blood sugar level is a little lower, you're more irritable, and then it's much harder to really think in some sense because now we just want to react. And then the
Hmm.
safest answer is to say no, which we know in most organizations. Not when you propose something new, the safe answer is no.
Mm.
So next time you propose something, always be sure the person has eaten breakfast, lunch, and then meet with them.
That's so interesting. I find also for myself, I'm more emotionally resilient when I eat breakfast. That seems to be a massive shift. It's like I said, think clearer, have more energy, and more satiated, and I believe that has to do with the frontal lobe of the brain being having its willpower intact when it has enough calories, right? And if we don't feed ourselves, that turns off, and our more mammalian animal brain takes over, and then it goes, we're starving, we need to eat, we're going to die, and then that's why we literally feel like we have no control over what we eat, and then we go for what? We go for high processed sugars to get the most energy as quickly as possible. That to me is so fascinating.
Yes, and you're totally right. And there's in fact very old research where what you do, you should take healthy people like you or your students, and now you go into a laboratory, you infuse them with glucose.
Hmm.
So that's like the massive intensive glucose tolerance test, which people drink now it's done right in the bloodstream. And now you stress them by hyperventilation.
Hmm.
And then you look at their brain and you see there's no change when the glucose is high. We know that a little bit because when our glucose is high, we have a little energy.
Hmm.
Now you wait 2.5 hours later. Now what happened is because you get this massive pulse of glucose, now the pancreas dumps massive amount of insulin. All the glucose is slowly taken out. It really expects more glucose or sugars to come in. It doesn't. So now you're almost hyperglycemic.
Hmm.
Now, when you repeat, and now you have the person after 2.5 hours, now their glucose is very low or lower. Now you have them again hyperventilate and breathe for 3 minutes. You probably can't do that study anymore now, but and then what you see is that brain frequencies drop to about 4. Now, if you think about it, this is the experience most people have, or many people have experienced, and it's called hangriness.
Mm.
Hunger, and then you're more irritable. You're totally right. At that moment, you're looking for immediacy of survival. And so to think of complex concepts in the future is just more challenging. And it's interesting if you travel internationally. You go to a bazaar in the Middle East, for example. I was in Turkey a couple of weeks ago. The first thing you do when you walk into those store, they give you a sweet and tea.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say, yes, that increases my glucose level. I become more friendly, or I feel I'm beholden to them. It can be both
Mm-hmm.
ways. But it's an interesting culture. So you're totally right. Going back
Yeah.
for making health happen. So I said, food is critical. Look at your hand for a moment. If you look at your hand, it's hard to believe. Every cell in my body is made with the food I ate, which is very interesting to think about. Now make the analogy of building a house. You have two parts. One, you have essentially the blueprints. You could say that's your genetics and epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
If they're poorer, the house will be more at risk. And then there's the material you built the house with. And if you use lousy materials, your structure is going to be more challenged. Let's say it that way. It's
Mm-hmm.
a very simplistic model. What makes, however, the human being different than a house is that we are continually reconstituting ourselves. Every cell in your body in 7 years from now
Mm-hmm.
is a new cell, even your bones. And, we in our gut, it's very short. And once we realize that, that means that if I change my lifestyle, I can really change the structure of my body, but that it also includes how we use ourselves. So health is also the use of self,
Mm-hmm.
which, in sports, in physical fitness, if you do exercise, you exercise to stress the system and then regenerate. If you allow enough regeneration, then the system can really build up and the person doesn't get weaker, they get stronger, they have more
Yep.
energy. So that's part one. I think the second one is most of us are so unaware that we are reacting to stimuli. And so one of the easy ways to observe is during the day, observe maybe where you're holding your breath, where do you tighten your shoulders. And the moment you become aware of that, learn skills to inhibit that. But really learn,
Mm-hmm.
identify the situation. And then you can ask yourself, is it worthwhile to die over? I don't know many situations where it's worthwhile to die over, but it's really conditioned. We have no idea we react.
Mm-hmm.
you know and so learning some form of skill by which I can tighten my muscles and let them go and notice the difference. For many people, it's really they find a slight bracing in the neck and shoulders. It's
Mm-hmm.
very subtle. It's not much. It's almost a feeling you get when somebody stands behind you and all of a sudden you feel yourself protecting. It's that first
Mm-hmm.
little piece. That is when you have to interact.
Yeah.
That is
So our
when you
nervous system is on all day. It's on alert, is what it sounds like you're referring to, and we're not even aware of how we have this security guard almost kind of in the background protecting us. But once you bring awareness to it, then you can start to feel how present it is.
Yes, and now that
Mm.
depends both on your early childhood. If you were brought up as if you're sensitive and lived in a very safe world, then you don't have these guards the same way. You're not quite vigilant the same way. But
Mm-hmm.
many of us are, I would almost say, hyper vigilant. We don't even know it, but we are always reacting very
Mm-hmm.
quickly. And whether we show it in body expression or we do it internally, that makes very little difference. And then we tend to brace a little bit and hold our breath. And so another part, which I think is intrinsic to all of us, is breathing. And many people breathe, I would say, inefficiently, let's say it that way,
Mm-hmm.
in a very black, or dysfunctionally, which they think is normal. And so if you can learn to breathe lower and slower, it's easier. Let me give an
Mm-hmm.
example how quickly our breathing may change. What I'd like you to do as you're listening to this show, don't do it while you're driving, by the way. And that is, I'm gonna make a noise. I'm gonna say, look, look, look. And with each look, I like you to look either to the right or to the left with your eyes. Keep your head steady, straight, but just with your eyes, look to the extreme right and then to the extreme left. You're ready?
Mm-hmm.
Now go. left, look, 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 look. So you're looking left, right, quicker and quicker, left, right. And as you're doing that, are you holding your breath?
Absolutely.
Almost everybody holds their breath. I know it's
Hmm.
an exaggeration. We don't think we do this. Yet, as we look at the screen, something, a notification pops up, we hold our breath.
Mm.
But why did you hold your breath, Nick?
To me, it felt like I was concentrating and there was a sense of almost fight or flight that kicked in because I was required to focus and I was required to be really vigilant. And as a result, my nervous system tensed. That's what I felt in myself.
You're totally right. In a way, if you think about it from a kind of evolutionary perspective or survival over the many, literally millions of years, right? When I walk across the savannah and I see something in the periphery that wiggles or moves, that
Hmm.
could be a tiger, or it could be something else, it could be food as well. But I have to look. And then if I don't move, I hold my breath, I freeze, two things happen. One, my hearing becomes more acute because the noise of breathing through my nose going up the eustachian tubes
Hmm.
is now stopped. So I hear slightly better, which helps my survival. And two, I freeze because I'm not moving my body for that moment. Then I become slightly less visible because our retina is usually much more sensitive to movement and to steady phenomena. So it
Yeah.
really works for survival. The only problem is that I don't see many tigers around me or dangers. Yes, my boss can be that. The
Hmm.
notification on my screen can be that. It still activates that pattern. So I would recommend for people to learn to recognize, huh, where did I hold my breath for a moment?
Hmm.
Is it necessary? Obviously, if you are going walking across the street and a car comes at you, I don't care what you do, just jump out of the way. But most of the time, wait, I'm just bracing for a moment. Is it necessary? If not, start going back and breathing lower.
Hmm.
Remember, the pattern of breathing is like a little baby almost. If you look at a little baby, a 1 year old who feels safe, they are breathing in their stomach. Their stomach gets bigger and smaller, easily in and out. The chest doesn't move much unless they're crying. But big. But
Hmm.
look at most of us. Most of us want to be tough. We lift up high up in our chest. And you could again think of this as an evolutionary perspective for survival. If
Hmm.
danger occurs, just think about it. Be scared and take a breath. You tighten your stomach, you tighten your body, you
Hmm.
protect against it. If someone is going to punch you in your stomach, I highly recommend you stiffen and make tight muscles there. But in other cases, it's not necessary. So why do we breathe in our chest so commonly? Maybe we should just observe that for a sec. If you can stand up for a moment, just stand up. And when you stand up, and
Hmm.
I'll just do that, although you miss me, and I'll make it small. I'm standing up. While standing up, I'd like you to take a very big breath, very quickly. And what you observe that most people then do as you do that, you're breathing high up in your chest. The key is that's an inefficient way of breathing because
Hmm.
basically if you could breathe lower in your lower that the lower lobes fill, that means the diaphragm has to go down and the stomach gets wider, you get two benefits. One, you get better air circulation, you could say, or air moving into the alveoli in the lower lobes, which
Hmm.
in fact allows better gas exchange than the upper lobes. It would
And the
avoid.
lungs, the lungs are huge, by the way, if you're listening. They're not just in the chest, like all the way down to the back of your ribs. They're
That's
they're
right.
really, really big, but most of us wouldn't know that because we're predominantly breathing in the upper chest.
Yes, and we think of breathing to take place in our chest. But in reality, think of the chest as almost like a dome structure, and there's a membrane at the bottom, which is your diaphragm. And when the way you efficiently breathe is that the diaphragm goes down, creating this space that allows the air to rush in. But in order for the diaphragm to go down, it has to displace the abdominal content.
Hmm.
And the abdominal content can be held in place in two or three reasons. One, I call it designer's jeans syndrome. That is your clothing. That means, is my belt tight? Do I have this figure eight
Mm.
look a bit? That
Like
means if,
like a corset the ladies used to wear back in the day, or something like that.
yes, and they used to develop an illness, many of them, alexithymia.
Mm.
No, I mean, not that, it will come to me. Many women who wore corsets in the 19th and early 20th century were suffering from many of the symptoms of anxiety,
Mm.
GI distress, and many other symptoms, which we now see with many people who have anxieties.
IBS is through the roof. I've noticed. Everyone's coming in. I have Crohn's. I have IBS. And it's like we're so related to the stress response in our systems, and we're not getting enough rest and digest. And there's a huge piece that, if you're listening, we are listening because you're listening, but it is the body doesn't have a difference for stress. It only speaks stress. So, as Dr. Pepper was saying, if a lion or your boss, there's no difference in terms of your physiology. It's just stress. We conceptually can understand the difference, but our bodies can't. That's so important to understand as you're dealing and working through different triggers.
Yeah, so let me go back to the IBS and the breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we said, for a moment, I said, if we can breathe lower and our lungs can expand more, especially when the diaphragm goes down, when this diaphragm goes down, as if you're creating more space for the lungs to expand. But it also means that my abdominal area has to change. So during
Mm-hmm.
inhalation, it needs to widen, it needs to relax the pelvic floor. And then in the vertical position, during exhalation, it almost comes in, pushes the
Mm-hmm.
diaphragm back up like a piston going up, squeezing the lungs in a sense, going upward, letting the air flow out. And then when the diaphragm tightens, in a sense, it would then flatten, go down, the lower ribs widen. It pushes the abdominal cavity to the sides, but it can only do that, like I said, if your belt is not tight or your corset isn't
Mm-hmm.
tight, or if you can allow your muscles to relax. And then if you do that, it does something which is most interesting and people forget about. And almost no one talks about this in my experience. That breathing pattern, the diaphragm going up and down, is a pump that facilitates lymph and venous blood circulation from the abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows this episodic wave of relaxation and slight tightening. And so if you have GI distress in many cases, whatever that may be, you know, it's often very useful to observe how are you breathing. And in our experience with our students and clients, almost anyone who has abdominal discomfort severe, for women, severe or menstrual distress,
Mm-hmm.
this called dysmenorrhea, most of them have almost no movement in their abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
If they can learn to breathe really slowly, allow that widening to occur, which, during inhalation, and slowly exhale, let it come back in during exhalation, then you're essentially allowing a rhythm to occur of tightening and relaxation, allowing the lymph to be pushed out, the venous to be pushed, returned to upward during the exhalation. And when you inhale, the inner abdominal pressure decreases, allowing all those vessels to fill again, the muscles to relax, and you do much better. And
And
when
correct me if I'm wrong, that triggers your parasympathetic nervous system as well, right?
correct, I mean, if you breathe much slower, lower, you could say you're breathing that way when you feel safe.
Mm.
Or you can, if you really feel safe, then you can let your abdomen widen. But for many people, they have done the pattern of breathing up in their chest, especially most people who have anxiety tend to breathe predominantly more quickly in their chest. I'm not saying that's the only factor, but that's the physiological piece. They experience often having cooler hands and cooler
Mm.
feet
Mm-hmm.
because they're breathing quickly. You could say they're ready for fight flight. So the blood flow goes away from even the periphery to the deep muscles to fight, except you're sitting politely and maybe being anxious. Now you do the inverse. Now you say, okay, something happened. Let me breathe lower and slower. And what we find, it takes really maybe 30 minutes, 30 seconds or 2 minutes to get yourself back.
Mm. That's
But
not
what
very
happens
long.
the first, no, but the first thing that happens, I get fearful. My brain starts going, I'm fearful, blah, blah, blah. And then each of those thoughts trigger another it amplifies the fear physiologically.
Mm.
So we forget that thoughts affect body, but body changes thoughts.
Yeah, it has to work. It has to work both ways. I was thinking the other day, maybe you could shed some light on this. I was stressed and tense in my mind, and I went and got a massage. And then after the massage, I noticed my mind was more relaxed, and I thought to myself, "Oh, so does that mean that a lot of the mental noise and stress I'm feeling is actually physical noise, or let's say stored trauma or stored stress?" Wondering what your thoughts on that were. It was so visceral, the experience of, oh.
I mean, the error we have made in psychology and medicine, I think, or I do it in a humorous way.
Mm-hmm,
Medicine or the internist takes you from the neck down,
mm-hmm,
facetiously. The neurologist and psychologist takes you from the neck up. The social worker takes you in your environment, and the clergy takes anything that floats around. However, they're
mm-hmm,
never separate. They're all the same. That's the error we have made, I think, ever since Descartes, to separate mind from body.
mm,
Every thought has a simultaneous corresponding body activity, and every body activity has a simultaneous cognitive emotional experience. And anyone knows that. I mean, at some way. You think of the people who think or watch pornography. That's a
mm-hmm,
mental image. It's a visual image coming in. Their body is responding.
mm-hmm.
Think of it that way, or vice versa. If you change your body, you will change your thoughts. And I don't know if we did this last time, but one of the most useful practices we do is the one where we have people sit in different body positions. Where if you collapse and you sit like in a letter C versus upright, maybe I'll guide people through that again.
Yeah, I love that one.
Okay, and then I'll give one more exercise people can do with each other. I'll try to explain it well enough to really show how powerful thoughts are. So you're evoking hopeless, helpless, powerless, defeated memories. And now do not change your position. Keep looking up. Still be open. Evoke only empowering and optimistic memories. You're evoking optimistic and empowering memories. I think that's enough. The concept is there. You can do this very accurately for 30 seconds, each of these changes. But what did you experience, Nick?
So it's interesting, and I teach this technique a lot because it's so powerful to touch for the first time, and it's also it's fun and funny at the same time. But I noticed for me as I'm so trained in how sensitive I am with my different bodies, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, that when you had me put my head down and evoke hopeless thoughts, I thought of abuse, I thought of trauma, um, I thought of failure. I also, I kind of wanted to cry and kind of wanted to um, just be very somber and shut down. And then when you had me had to switch to the having positive thoughts, looking downwards. One, I really couldn't do it. I had to kind of pull them, and even if I did connect to them, I couldn't feel them. So they had no emotional or physiological jolt. They were kind of just they were mute. And on the inverse, when I looked up and you said to have negative thoughts, I actually started smiling because it was like it felt ridiculous to look up and have a negative thought. And this is where so many yoga teachers don't actually know some of the real power of yoga is the poses are designed to do exactly this. So if I'm stressed, what I shouldn't do is drink a cup of coffee and do a handstand, for example. It should be a decaf tea and a forward fold to turn inward and calm down and breathe deep. Now, if I'm tired or I'm feeling unenergetic, then a back bend, a handstand, something with my arms, and you can. And I
And
even heard your
open up.
voice change as you were talking. Yeah, and open, right? And it's like that's the power of yoga is the physiology and the breath and the awareness together. And you're going, oh my God, I'm not just doing a pose. I'm transforming my physiology in a very intentional way. Real quick for me, I don't really have a yoga practice anymore. I do yoga poses that I need from a prescriptive measure. And same with breath work and meditation. It's like, well, how do I feel? How do I want to feel? And then that's where I then input the appropriate pose, breath work, meditation, or food to then create the desired result, almost like alchemy or like micro calibrations. But a lot of that I learned from this technique of, oh, it would be ridiculous for me to sit down curled all day and then believe I should have a positive mindset in life and feel healthy. It's like it's so close to us, but we can't see it because we don't have the feedback.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement. So going back over the little exercise
Yeah.
for a moment, that what many people experience when, just like what you did, collapse, it's easy to evoke hopeless, helpless memories, be more captured by them.
Hmm.
It's hard to think positive ones or empowering. And when they're up, they can still access those hopeless memories usually, but they're often more distant. And this is one of the most useful practices I know, and something one can take in the world. It also matches a little bit what people would say before you respond to somebody. Take a breath, or take two or three breaths, and take time out to stop the immediacy of the automatic response. Pull
Hmm.
back in a way, get centered. And so, a very useful strategy, I think, for in most settings, is if you feel a bit you're reactive, hopeless, or you're trying to positive. The moment you react, stop for a sec. Shift your posture first, which is really strange, no? But you shift. Don't look slightly up. Take a breath, and then contemplate the thought. And I'm not saying that anything that's really new. These are old techniques, but they're very powerful. If you do this hundreds of times, many times during the day, you'll find you are becoming less reactive. You can use your frontal cortex more, because really you don't need a frontal cortex when a car is starting to approach you and hit you. You just need to jump out of the way. And so, but in our more modern world, how can I be more think more optimistically? And I often think of this in terms of psychotherapy or medicine or health or even being at home, because we have so many people now who report having more depression.
Hmm.
But think about it, we now live in a world of sitting disease. And how do most people sit at home when we watch streaming videos? We sit collapsed on the couch. Well, you can still
Hmm.
watch sitting, but if you put a pillow behind your lower back, you'd be erect, then you look more upward. So there are many, or if you feel depressed, put positive pictures not on your table, but slightly above eye level. So by definition, you have to look up a bit. There are many tricks.
Hmm.
The key is that we are mind. body. Now, Nick, the other exercise which you often demonstrate, but I cannot easily do it by myself, and that is using how thoughts affect you. And but let me explain it in detail, and maybe people can practice with somebody else. What you do, you find a partner, and you stand in front of them, and then what you do is you ask them to bring their arm up like this,
Mm-hmm.
and then you press on their wrist downward. So you're pressing on their wrist downward to get a sense how strong they are. The key is not to force it. The key is just press downward and get a sense of strength. You test one arm, then you test the other arm the same way. After you've
Mm-hmm.
figured out which arm is stronger, because someone could have a shoulder injury, then all you do, you can do this in single blind study. You can ask the person to evoke a memory when they felt hopeless, helpless, and powerless. Really make that really real. And when they got it, then you repeat the press on the arm. That's one. And then after you've done that, you ask them to evoke a memory of empowerment, of being very positive and really, expanding memory where everything went well. When they say, yes, I got it, then you press on the wrist again. You repeat that same press. For 97% of people, they'll experience that when they think of the hopeless, helpless memory, their strength is less. It's noticeable.
Drastically less.
Yes, it varies a bit, but
Yeah.
depends how much you're captured by.
Mm.
Absolutely. It's so impressive. And for the 3%, usually, to be honest, there are usually two answers for that when you ask them. One, they thought of anger or resentment
Mm-hmm.
versus and notice I used the language very carefully: hopeless, helpless, powerless. Anger and resentment often means up yours.
Yeah.
You or one or two of them, that's much rarer. Once they're captured by one memory, they don't really shift to the other.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
But it's so if you do this in a group, I mean, we always do this as a double blind study, where what we do is we demonstrate the exercise first, then we ask people to pair up, and then the person who's testing doesn't know what the person is thinking. So the
Mm-hmm.
person can take either hopeless, helpless, powerless first, or the empowerment one. They don't say anything. They just test it. After they have the memory, they test and they don't say anything. Then they flip it around. In 97% of the cases, the students can guess correctly which one the person was thinking.
This, as you're saying this makes me think about, okay, let's say you are an executive. Let's say you're going into an important meeting. Let's say you're an athlete. Let's say you're a public speaker, right? Let's say you're in sales. Well, if for the majority of our life we're looking down at our phone, hunched over, where our physiology isn't in a heightened state. So the best thing to do before stepping into an important meeting would be to look up, do the power stance, right? Stand in the mirror and get your physiology in a place, in a space where you're ready to perform, or at least give yourself the best chance to perform.
Yes. And what you're saying really was data by Amy Cuddy, in a sense, the
Yep.
same
Mm-hmm.
way, where, there's some controversy of this, but she's basically correct that you want to configure yourself in an optimistic way. You also give another message to people. If I collapse and I sit in front of a meeting with my legs crossed and I sit like this, I don't give the image of power or knowledge.
Mm-mm.
I want to be open, receptive, and feel. And then the other piece I would always add, especially for my students, look at somebody who with friendly eyes. Focus on the people. Find the person who has a smile and try to talk to that person and that person. You don't know what they're thinking, but do it that
Mm-hmm.
way. There are many strategies for that. But
I
the
love this
piece,
one you taught with the old.
yes.
First, if you don't have it on video, I just put a pencil in my mouth, and that makes you smile, which makes you feel better, even if you're not really smiling. Try that one when you get a chance at home.
That's right.
That'll blow your mind.
And just look at people and think positively. We often
Mm.
feel, oh, I'm going to be judged. No. What is your message? What is the one purpose? I'm trying to share something that's useful for the other people or for the company or whatever. The other one piece I think is critical is language.
Mm-hmm.
And that is Often we say to ourselves, don't do this. Our brain, when we say don't smoke, don't eat a piece of pie or sugar, all we do is rehearse. We have to first see ourselves smoking or eating that piece of pie and then put a cross through it. So basically, we are strengthening the pathways for smoking more
Because we're
or eating more.
seeing the image of smoking.
Before you can, and then you say, don't do it.
Hmm.
Our brain works much better to say, we need to tell the brain where we want to go. So if I want to not smoke, I see myself as being a non-smoker, which is a totally different perspective. If I don't want to eat sweets, I don't say don't eat cookies. I'm starting to look forward to eating an apple, an orange, or some food.
Hmm. So you're saying that the image we put in our mind
Is what we
creates
become.
the pathway of what we become, and by
Correct.
saying don't smoke, don't drink, don't do whatever, there's also a judgment on that too. I'm making it wrong, or I'm making myself less than, is what that feels like as well, rather than the empowered way of I am someone who eats healthy. I am someone who eats breakfast. I am someone who does breath work. I am someone who exercises.
Yes. And so it's like exercise. It isn't, I should exercise. I'm
Mm-hmm.
choosing to exercise. I'm
Mm-hmm.
choosing to feel more energy in my body. Notice it's kind of, it's a different language. The other part is so often people now think, I should have done it in the past. They blame themselves. And I would have to argue, whatever you did in the past was the only thing that was your best solution you had to solve it. So therefore,
In that
accept
moment.
that.
Yep.
It is just, it's deep acceptance. It doesn't mean you can't look back. If you hurt somebody in the past, and I think we all have done that, it's still the only thing you could have done at that moment because you didn't have any other skills. If you
Mm-hmm.
feel sad about that or you feel guilty about that, then you do restitution. That's a different piece. Restitution doesn't mean to yourself, I could have done something different at that moment. You couldn't, but you can still
Mm-hmm.
call the person up and say, this shit happened. I feel so sorry about it. What can I do to make it up or do something?
Mm-hmm.
That's a different piece. But
If you
so
if you
often,
should have done it, if you could have done it, you would have done it.
yes,
But you couldn't in that moment, which is also then you can look at positive failure. Oh, now I know what not to do. So now in this moment I have more skills to do something different. And then then it's like, oh, I had to do that to learn so I could grow and develop more skills. So actually my failure, quote unquote, was part of
is
my growth.
that is the development of resilience.
Mm.
And I think we live in a world where so often now we don't allow people to make errors. Errors are not bad. You have to make an error in order to learn. If I'm learning a new skill, if I do skateboarding, then I'm going to fall. That's an error, technically. No, it is just teaching myself I need to do something different.
Hmm.
And we forget that, the richness to say, well, if you make the same error time and time again, then I would say, look at that and you need to change something.
Hmm.
And that leads to the reframing of ourselves. And maybe I'll tell the final story on this. I
Sure.
was giving a workshop and there was a woman during the break who came up to me and said, I have a bad eye. My eye is much smaller. It's really, I've gone to my ophthalmologist and they can't figure out anything for this. She told, and they said, okay, come in front of the class. And then she told the story that a number of years ago with her baby had, with her sharp nails, had scratched her cornea very severely. That then she had to wear a patch or something for do something with her eye for a long time period. And thereafter, her eye, you know, became smaller, literally,
Hmm.
for her in her perception. And she's gone to many therapists. But she was talking about her bad eye all the
Hmm.
time. My eye, this is a bad eye. I have a bad eye and a good eye. We hear this with many people. I have a bad arm, or
Yep.
whatever,
I don't
or I
have
have a
people say
weak
that in
arm.
my wellness studios ever. Nope, not your bad arm. It might need a little more attention, but don't
Correct.
it's listening.
And so then we did a little practice in front of the class, where she was trying to, you know, change the language of her eye. Maybe what does her eye need? Maybe inspect your eye. How's it now? How would it look all normal, etc. Finally, for her, it meant she came up with an image where she could give her eye a hug. And
Mm.
because she could appreciate, I said, appreciate how much I had done before, all the years you have abused it in a way, which we do. We stay up too late, we look at the bright sun, whatever. Uh, you know, so both be appreciative of all that you have done, how you have abused, and your eye still worked well. So change the language, send a lovingness to her eye in that sense. And she did that then by giving it a big hug. And when she was
Mm.
doing that, almost tears came out of her eyes and she felt her eyes getting totally normal. Now, what we forget is at that moment that worked, but we go back to our old habits. And so then we did meet with her. We taught a few other techniques, and slowly she caught herself doing this all the time. And after about 3 weeks, her bad eye is now totally normal. It's no longer
Mm.
smaller. It was so impressive. We wrote it up as an article, in fact. We've heard descriptions of it, and that's also posted on our blog, pepperperspective.com. But it's really useful to think, how do you talk about yourself? Do you see yourself being stupid about stuff? Or are you in the process of still mastering the skill? And I think when we do physical training, how do you label yourself? You're weak. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like we say, am I depressed? No, I'm not
No.
depressed. My energy is lower now than at other times.
Hmm.
And notice that language allows you to change.
Yeah, I don't have anxiety. Sometimes I feel
You,
anxiety.
that's right. At this moment, I'm more anxious than some other people, or at this moment, I'm more
Hmm.
agitated. And that finally reminds me of one woman that's in my class who I never met, but she took the holistic health class at San Francisco State. She had a motorcycle accident a year before. I did not know that, in which she broke both her jaw in two places. Her
Mm.
L3 was crushed. She had to have metal put into her spine. And she was taking pain medications. She took the class just like you did at one time or others, which they learn basically simple concepts of empathy, and you have to practice every day. That's the distinction in the class.
Hmm.
You learn both about the psychophysiology of stress and concepts, many others about holistic health, and you have to implement the practice. She did it. It was most impressive. By the end of the semester, her pain had gone. She took herself off all medications, which I wouldn't have recommended right away, but she did. And she changed her image. But the most important part was she also changed her perception of her pain. Initially,
Mm.
it was just pain as one big thing. And then when she became observant, she saw, I have these both sharp pains, almost like thorns in my back, and kind of tension and tightness. Then she could work at bringing warmth to the back, which she had learned in the class how to warm her hands, which occurs when you get more quiet and you can use your imagery. She used her imagery to warm her back, and then almost in her imagery, see the pain processes disappear. And by being so, this kind of breaking up the global concept of pain into tightness and the thorns, she could now work
Hmm.
on it. And the key is we want to work at a project, do it small enough to make changes.
Mm. Even
It's just
thinking
like
of
when you
if,
do sports, right? You start,
yeah,
you don't run a marathon the first day.
thinking of if someone comes to me and they say, "No, no, Nick, I'm stressed." It's like we can't do anything with that. That's too big of a statement. It's the question is, okay, what are you stressed about? Oh, I'm stressed about work. Well, okay, now we can talk about that. What about work are you stressed about? I'm stressed about my commute. Okay, so then we can work with those pieces rather than this global thing, this global perspective. And if no one's seen the bad apple study online, go check that out. The good apple, bad apple. If you put two apples next to each other and you tell one apple it's a piece of shit for a week, and you tell the other one it's a beautiful apple, by the end of the week, the bad apple will be decrepit and deformed and brown, and the good apple will be so vibrant. And it's like, if we can do that to an apple, imagine what we can do to ourselves through our words, through our language, through eating, through breathing properly, through listening to perspectives like this. So I have a question before we jump off. If all of your work got erased and you weren't a professor anymore, what would be the one wellness tip you would tell everyone that this is the exact thing they need to do to have the biggest lever on their health?
There's no one thing for everybody
Mm.
because people are all different. So that's the rule one. So I'm going to do
Mm.
two. I'm sorry. Uh, The
I
second
like it.
is for most people, though breathing is one of the more useful things within with a positive attitude. And third, which is like, notice I'm going to, we all need to live in a community of social support.
Mm. Hmm.
And that's why you hire a coach. That's why you have family members who support you. And I would say if you plan to change your life, it's much easier to do it in a group that are sympathetic and support you than try to do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
So
Find
find
your tribe.
friends who, we notice even on the human biome, by the way, that if you are with people, your biome will change to your partner and others a bit. So we are, even at
Mm.
the microscopic level, we are affected by others.
So if I have friends that are healthier than me, that will help me become healthier.
Most likely, because they will take you to it's like I go hiking every Sunday with friends.
Mm-hmm.
And partly I happen to send out the email. But also the day I don't quite feel like it, now I have the guilt of meeting with my friends and I show up anyway and I feel so much better afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so my friends are equally the glue that make me healthy. And we know that and I do think this is for children critical, for teens, which parents implicitly know. If your child has friends who are positive and do well in school, your child will probably do well in school.
Mm.
And if they have friends which are not like that, then the odds are that they're going to have more difficulty. I realize always that there are always exceptions.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate it. What's the best way listeners can get in touch with you or learn more about your perspectives?
Probably the easiest way is to look at the book called Pepper Perspectives. That's Pepper with one P, P-E-P-E-R, perspective.com. I also have an email address, which is Erik, E-R-I-K .pepper @gmail.com. I mean, we did a couple of books, which, you already shared them on Make Health Happen. I would
Mm-hmm.
only recommend buying it from the publishers in ebook because it's too expensive otherwise. I'm just
Mm.
being honest. And the other book, which I find very helpful, is the book we wrote with Rick Harvey and Nancy Faas called Tech Stress, which has many concepts in it, which I would highly recommend for people, especially in a world where we are inundated by technology and captured by it. And the question is, how can you make it work for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's excellent. This has been great. It's been super informational and inspirational for me as well, and just reminded me of a lot of things I learned from San Francisco State and you, and it's just been so awesome to share these practices with students and listeners, and just the impact that your work continues to have. So, thank you for being on the show. And
Let me add one more piece, if that's okay, Nick. That for
yes,
for students, who want to learn more about these concepts and or high school students who want to go to college, San Francisco State is in the neighborhood around San Francisco. It's a great place to do many different majors, and one of them they
hmm,
could take classes in holistic health, which I think are great for everybody. At least one or two of those classes for
yep,
lifelong learning.
absolutely, totally agree with that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on. Appreciate your time, your energy, your presence. And for everyone listening, if you found this useful, please share it with someone who you think it could help change their lives. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye.